Frank, thanks again for being with us today to dig even deeper into this 7 capabilities framework that we've been discussing for the past little while. We covered, we did the 7 capabilities overview. We dug into the True North strategy. And now we are digging into the meat, exceptional execution. How do you execute that True North strategy? How do you put every piece of the puzzle in place to make sure that you achieve that summit, that you reach that big goal that you have in mind? So I'll let you take the wheel, maybe lead us into a quick recap of what we talked about already and how that leads us into capability number 2, exceptional execution.
Yeah, exceptional execution. A lot of people, when they hear that, they think I'm referring to your execution of client services. I think people hear that and they closely associate it with the work they do for clients. So certainly that is an element of execution. But what we're talking about in terms of the growth momentum method is once you have your True North established, what is your mode of execution across the entire company to go about moving your company towards the True North in a rhythmic, methodical way? How do you go about doing that consistently so that you are making consistent progress towards your True North? Think about it like a journey. Your True North becomes this North Star, this direction on the compass that you just keep moving towards. If we set our True North properly, we rarely need to change it. So it becomes this long-term directional thing for us. So that means that our mode of execution towards True North needs to have certain qualities, right? It has to be lean. It has to be consistent. It has to be periodic. It has to be unified in how we get everyone involved in that process.
So you said something that's really important, which is people think about execution, they think about how do we execute campaigns? That's not the point here. The point is how do we set up the team and how do we set up the processes to execute that big goal and
to grow the company, right?
To grow the company. Yeah.
It's certainly important. It's certainly important that as we execute services for clients that we have processes, right? That should be a given. But what we're talking about is, do you have a process to grow the company towards the True North? And that's what exceptional execution is. And the person that heads up exceptional execution is typically going to be called the president, the COO, the general manager, right? That is the execution work that by and large is a bulk of the effort relative to CEO work, right? The CEO work is defining the True North and every so often, periodically, looking at the company to make sure it's behaving in accordance with True North. But that isn't the bulk of the day-to-day work. If you're a founder and you wear the CEO title, that's fine. Or you wear the visionary title, whatever you want to call it. That's totally fine. But just know the bulk of the work is in this exceptional execution stuff. It's the consistent planning and management of the plan to grow the business.
You mentioned 4 qualities: lean, consistent, periodic, unified. And that's helmed by the COO, or like you said, the president, who's in charge of the execution. So what does that day-to-day look like for that person executing this plan?
There are 6 components of exceptional execution. And if we were to think of it in a wheel, they're rhythmic. And you get into that process on a quarterly basis is my recommendation. And they surround True North. So as you do each of these things, each of these 6 components, as you execute them, the idea is that the execution of each component stays in alignment with True North. So the very first one is what I would call a momentum analysis. So at the beginning of every quarter, the team should engage in an analysis on the business to rate the organization across the 7 capabilities. Every quarter, you do it again. Every quarter, you re-rate the company on the 7 capabilities. My clients that work with me, they have a tool to help them do this. And that tool has a total of about 63 or 64 different attributes across those 7 capabilities. And so what we're doing is we're trying to find at a macro level, where's the blocker to growth, the blocker to momentum. And then at a sub macro level, kind of at a micro, within that blocker, what are some of the attributes that are causing that area to be a blocker to growth? So the idea is that we do a momentum analysis every quarter. We get aligned and agree on what our blockers to momentum are. Once we do that, then the second component is that we engage in a quarterly planning process. Okay. So we develop a plan that will tackle the blockers to growth. In addition to what we're going to do to tackle the blockers to growth, we're also going to set targets for each of the areas KPIs, as well as every individual's KPIs. Okay, so that's the plan. The third component is once you have a plan, you engage in daily measurement. So this means that everyone on the team measures what's relative to their role. Okay, so is there any progress on a given KPI? If so, update it. The activities that we do consistently on a weekly basis, we call those the fundamentals, or in our system, we call it the hay, meaning we got to chew the hay. We got to eat the hay every week. So what is the update on those weekly fundamentals? How many did you do? Recording that. So daily measurement. Daily measurement's critical because if we don't record it, if we don't measure it, we can't improve it. The fourth component is, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that can include everything from, digital improvements, like systems improvements, or content creation, like day-to-day content creation. It can include sales targets for the sales team, right? We're talking about granular progress measured daily across all teams. Is that right?
Yeah. So what you're measuring on your daily measurement is the update on your KPIs, metrics, and what I call the hay, which are the weekly fundamental repeating activities in your role. Perfect. So it's relative to every single person's role. So if you have a frontline producer, theirs will look a lot different than, say, someone who is the head of the services offering, right? Perfect. So everyone's going to update their area, their own KPIs, their metrics, their weekly fundamentals, right? So just updating that takes 5 to 10 minutes every day. It should be a cultural thing that gets installed within the company. The fourth component is what we call weekly accountability. So weekly accountability is where teams meet to update each other on the progress of their measurables as well as their area of the plan. So if we're talking about the executive team, then the executive team meets and they're updating each other on their areas KPIs, their areas weekly activities and so on. They're updating each other on the progress of their plan. In a services team, if a services team has, let's say, 4 departments, then those 4 departments are meeting for weekly accountability. It's really important when we install weekly accountability that this becomes a cultural habit within the company. But another important aspect of it is we're not talking about the kind of accountability where a manager leads the meeting and is holding their subordinates' feet to the fire, so to speak. Everyone's required to show up prepared with their data, and they're required to share it themselves in front of their peers. So what we're creating is self-accountability. Okay. So when people have when I see organizations use one-on-ones for accountability, I completely disagree with that. I believe accountability should be public. And it shouldn't be, manager holding someone under the light. It should be in every single individual, including a manager, including a leader, reporting on their area of what they're responsible for. Here's my progress. Here's what I'm committing to doing this week based on, my area of the business, my area of the plan. And so that self-accountability is a really important cultural thing to install. And so what ends up happening is that just inherent pressure means we don't have to have anyone be, overtly managerial, quote unquote. Accountability kind of takes care of itself when you do it in public.
It's a way to motivate team members because they realize what their role is, what part it plays within the structure, and how they contribute to the overarching goal and to the success of the agency in the case of digital agencies or marketing agencies. And in that way, it's not a punitive measure, it's a motivating measure, right?
It becomes a part of cultural normal behavior. So that way, contrasted against another organization who doesn't do this, then if they're ever asked, it becomes being put on the spot. This just becomes normal behavior where we show up to the weekly accountability meeting and everyone gives their update on their progress. And, yes, it's motivating, but more importantly, what it does is it demonstrates the right behavior so people can model it and learn from what's considered normal. And then the other thing it does is that it will absolutely ferret out who's not right for your team. Because if you have somebody who is just trying to mail it in, it will become very obvious. They will only get away with a couple of these weekly accountability meetings before, wait a second, when the supervisor manager starts to look at numbers overall or look at progress overall, and it's not matching what, Johnny is saying week after week, that the difference becomes really obvious. So people who want to skate in an organization, it becomes really obvious. They kind of reveal themselves and they either have to get on board or they start to get uncomfortable really fast and they opt to leave.
Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification there. Number 5.
Yeah. So the 5th component is doing a monthly update. So this is where the entire company gets together and the leadership team, which is the executive team, as well as any other managers in the company who have an opportunity to participate, update the company on the progress of the plan. And it's also a time to celebrate and recognize people who are doing an amazing job, what wins we've had. If people have work anniversaries, to celebrate and recognize those people. It's an opportunity for the team to learn something. So I recommend in the monthly update, there's a slot to teach people something. And this is an awesome opportunity to engage people at all levels of the organization. So that way they get a chance to have the spotlight and teach. Let's say there was a new software that the company is using to serve clients. It's an opportunity for some, sub manager or maybe even a senior producer on the team to come in and present to the company on a new software that they're using, or maybe there was something implemented for clients that's resulting in huge client wins. And so it's an opportunity for them to teach the company something, or, maybe someone in the administrative area has something to teach the team about, I don't know, time management. And so there are opportunities to teach something and let other people shine. I highly recommend that it's not just the executive team that presents during a monthly update, but we're doing a number of things. We're getting the team aligned. We're making them aware of the progress on the plan. We're recognizing and high-fiving people, and we're giving other people a chance to shine and demonstrate, their knowledge and teach the company something.
I'm proud to say that it's something that we do at Agency on a daily basis. We have an assembly meeting. Everybody gets together. Leadership updates us on how we're doing progress-wise for the long-term goal for the year and beyond. Sometimes there's other projects come to play, and everybody gets a turn. And there is an opportunity for celebration, accomplishments, anniversaries, and learning opportunities. So
That's
I
great.
highly recommend it because I find it so helpful. So for any agency out there, do it. It's awesome. So that brings us to number 6,
Yeah.
our
So
sixth component.
the sixth and final component of exceptional execution are the things you do to empower individual excellence. And so there's two sides to individual excellence. There's one, creating clarity and empowerment for every single individual's job role. So you do that by defining what I call the 7 boxes. The 7 boxes that you would define in your business plan are also the same 7 boxes you would define for every individual's role. So what this does for individuals is it removes all ambiguity and creates extreme clarity about why their role exists, how they're going to win, and down to the level of their repeating weekly activities, their repeating weekly fundamentals, what they should be doing every week that will breed and bring about the KPIs. So that's one aspect. The other aspect of creating that empowerment are the one-to-ones that are done, 1 to 2 times per month with individuals. And that one-to-one isn't a time to quote unquote hold people accountable. That's why we have public weekly accountability. The one-on-one time is really just to hear from your team member, hear from your employee. How are things going? How are things going personally? How are things going professionally? And then the third component is, what can I start doing or stop doing to help you and or the company succeed, right? So it's an opportunity to truly just hear from that individual. Now, the other side of the coin, we were creating clarity and empowerment. The other side of the coin is how we address individuals and how we engage individuals who are breaking promises or dropping the ball. I mean, that's the other side of individual excellence. We don't just create excellence by only addressing the positive things, but we have to have a protocol for how we address the negative things, because those will happen at times. And so the process that we take to address broken commitments and or underperformance, it's really important that we have a process for doing that, and that we're consistent in how we go about doing that for everybody on the team. So that's the other side of creating individual excellence.
So we've walked through the 6 components of execution. I think everything's very clear from a theoretical point of view, from an execution, from a bad pun here, but in terms of executing the exceptional execution, that's a mouthful. Can you give me an example of an agency or company that works within marketing where this process they had to implement, and sort of roadblocks that they've encountered along the way, and successes in the end after everything was put together correctly?
Yeah, so the common roadblock is that once you develop any plan for a given quarter, the common roadblock is that a professional services business, especially an agency, is just filled with chaos, because we not only have a team of people, professional labor, but we also have clients. So lots of humans in the mix who have lots of needs and agendas and needs that need to be met. And things don't go perfectly. Campaigns for clients won't go well. Clients won't deliver what they're supposed to deliver on time. An employee might make a mistake or drop a ball. There's lots of variables in there, so it can be a very chaotic business model. And so it's real easy for people to get caught up in the whirlwind of the chaos and put their plan on the back burner, or come up with reasons why, we need to postpone our weekly accountability meeting because we got this client fire. So one of the things that I teach my clients is your repeating rituals of daily measurement, weekly accountability, monthly updates are not to be moved for any reason whatsoever. I mean, it would have to be a true emergency. And the problem is in most professional services business, we label too many things as emergencies. And the reality is emergencies are, reasons to not attend a weekly accountability meeting, birth, death, and PTO. Like I'm hyperbolic when I say that, but I'm trying to emphasize the point that a client who needs to talk to you is not a reason to skip the weekly accountability meeting. You tell the client, I'm not available at that time, but I am available at this time. If you have a sales prospect that wants to meet at that time, I'm not available at that time, but I am available at this time. So that habit change is really critical. That behavioral shift is really critical, because if you don't make that behavioral shift, there will always be a reason to back burner your rhythms, your rituals. There will always be a reason why your quarterly plan didn't come to fruition. There will always be a reason why your quarterly planning strategy day, didn't get scheduled, or you had to put it off by a couple of weeks. I promise, no matter what size you get, no matter how successful you are, there will always be a reason. So that is a big, big behavioral shift that must happen. Otherwise, this business can be chaotic, and it just can be a permanent feeling of chaos. So we have to commit to those things and not let those be forsaken. My clients who commit to the process and, understand that the rhythms and the rituals are important. The cadences are really, really important. They stick to it. They have amazing things happen in the business, and it's not all a bed of roses and perfection and like birds chirping and, unicorns and rainbows. There's still chaos, but they're not chaotic within the chaos, right? They're in the chaos, but not of the chaos. And so they have a much better way to handle those things. One of my clients out of London, for example, has taken this approach. He's become, the go-to agency in his space. He's 4x, 5x his revenue. He's able to have a team execute that and doesn't have to get pulled into the process for clients. So it really is about just methodical, consistent execution against the process. And eventually, you get there. But if we have these reasons why it's okay to not attend this meeting or put off this, these cadences, we're just going to keep ourselves. We become part of the chaos rather than just being operating in the chaos. Does that make sense?
It does. You mentioned something earlier about Johnny, our hypothetical employee, who, for some reason, when it comes to accountability, there's a disconnect, right? The numbers don't match, the accountability doesn't match. And you made it sound like there would be a natural sort of attrition that happens with Johnny naturally kind of deciding this is not the place for me. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes there are players that will not meet those standards and are not going of their own volition. So how do we approach that from an execution standpoint? What's the best practices for agency leaders who are dealing with team members or someone in leadership who doesn't necessarily align?
Yeah. So that's that sixth component called individual excellence. So that right there will take care of both sides, right? How we proactively empower the individual by making sure their role is extremely clear. And we're doing the one-on-ones 1 to 2 times per month to hear that person and through that process, we're hearing the things that they need to be empowered with, they need to be equipped with, where they need to be supported. And, we're operating on the positive side. If we have to operate on the negative side, meaning in spite of all of that, they're either underperforming or dropping the ball or both, breaking commitments, then we have to have a process for addressing that swiftly. The problem most small businesses have is they don't address those things swiftly, and they're inconsistent in how they address those things. So you end up with people hanging around longer than they should. You end up with people that can become toxic to the work environment because people will see that and say, well, why does he get away with that? Or clearly that person's a favorite, or, and so it just sends the wrong message. So we have to address that other side of it swiftly. And so one of the things that we do when we we're addressing from the negative side, or there's a negative situation we have to address after we've done all the proactive things, is we have to first ask ourselves, is it them or is it us? Is it them or is it us? We do have to have one more check to make sure that it's not us. And by us, what I mean is, were they empowered and were they equipped? So part of the empowerment we're already doing. If we've made sure that they have the 7 boxes defined for their job role, we're doing the one-on-ones with them. We're keeping our rhythms consistent and all of that. Were they empowered, right? Or excuse me, were they aligned? So it's aligned and empowered. So did we have alignment? Okay. If the answer is no, well, then we have to take that back on our shoulders and say, okay, let's get alignment. If the answer is yes, then we go to the next thing. Are they empowered? So empowered means, have they been given the right autonomy and authority for their level? Have they been given access to and pointed to, and do they know how to get support? Are they equipped? Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right computer? Do they have the right desk? Do they have the right software? Are they equipped? And so that's the aligned and empowered. So if they're both aligned and they're empowered, now we move into performance management, right? So now we have a conversation and we get clear that we have an issue here, okay? And we document that and we get clear on what the action plan is. And then if it comes up again, we just go back through that process. So if it's, yep, we're still aligned. Yep, they're still, empowered. Then now we're having a second conversation, and now we've ramped up the severity and the intensity of that conversation. And then by the time the third time it happens, then we're talking about really, this is kind of the last chance, and that's when you're moving to a performance improvement plan, what we call a PIP, right? So that's just a real, brief overview of that process. We probably wouldn't want to go too deep in the post about that. Certainly that's a part of my training where I get into all those details. But the idea is that, on the other side of that, when we have to address either underperformance or broken commitments, we have to ask ourselves, were we aligned and were they empowered? And if it's yes and yes, then it's a them problem, not an us problem.
Thank you so much for that clarification. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, I wrote an article not too long ago about the challenges of implementing something like EOS. And there are similarities in some of these aspects, especially in the accountability issue, on the accountability side and the empowerment side. And sometimes it can be viewed by team members, not in leadership, as potentially toxic. But I do love the clarity here about, does it align? Is it them? Is it us? Is it both? Like, what can we do as a team to resolve this issue so that there isn't that feeling that something's broken? It's something that can be fixed. And, down the road, like you said, it's probably the topic for a different post, but down the road, there's these measures that can be taken once things get really dire. But in this case, it's an easy checklist to follow to figure out, is this exceptional execution plan working out for everybody involved?
So that part of it, like the way we address underperformance and our broken commitments, is part of, it's part of the 6th component of creating individual excellence, which is part of the growth momentum method. Like, that approach has to be taken with everybody on the team, whether they're in client services or in finance or admin, sales, marketing, it doesn't matter. That is the approach that has to be implemented for everybody. And when we validate that we have alignment and we have empowerment, then it's a them issue. But what we in the first conversation we have, if it's a them issue, the way I teach it is that even that conversation is one of partnership. It's one, hey, how can we work together? How can I help you? How can I help you so this doesn't happen again? But if that happens a second time, then that tone shifts. It's like, wait a second, we were aligned, we were empowered. We came up with a plan to get you what you need, and we still have an issue. So, then we ramp it up. And by the third time, then it's clearly, hey, this is severe at this point. Your employment is in jeopardy at this point. But we don't start with that tone, right? We graduate the tone. The very first conversation, once we verify they've been aligned, they've been empowered, is what can we do? It's a collaborative approach. The second conversation is not collaborative. It's accountability. Third conversation is, this is really severe. That you're in jeopardy of really not having employment with us anymore.
Yeah. that makes total sense. Thank you for that. I want to get back to the person that heads the exceptional execution. So we're talking, you mentioned the chief operating officer, COO, president, whatever the title may be. What are the inherent qualities that person, that leader in that position needs to have to helm that capability?
Yeah, this person is a generalist because they manage the heads of all of the other capabilities. So they manage the head of client services, they manage the head of marketing, sales, administration, and finance. Okay. So they're a generalist. They need to be a good business planner. They need to be a good manager. They definitely need those leadership skills, which includes, excellent communication. They have to be excellent at being a generalist problem solver, because essentially what they're going to do is, on a consistent basis, they're going to be diving in to the various capability areas if the leader of that capability area has a problem and needs some additional thoughts and leadership to help solve a problem. So that's why we often use the phrase general manager. They have to be a good general business manager. And so all the things that come along with that, they need to be analytical because they're going to be working with the various capability areas to make sure the data flows and, looking at trends. They should have an above average understanding of finance. So that way they can get the P&L and they can dig in, and they could even ask things of the person who heads up finance instead of just relying on the finance person to bring all the insights. They should understand the levers that drive retention and profitability in the business. Yeah. So they have to be a really good general business manager.
Yeah. And that comes with experience. That comes with, knowledge gathered over years of helping run businesses. Can you give me an example of a company where they didn't have this plan in place, this system of exceptional execution, and after implementing, they've seen vast improvements and results based on some of the clients that you collaborated with?
Yeah. So one of my clients is a husband and wife team, ran a digital agency. They run a digital agency, and they had just some confusion, and they didn't have this kind of process, and they didn't have this kind of clarity in this. So once we installed this process, we removed lots of activities from his plate, removed activities from her plate. She then was established as a clear owner of certain capability areas that was really confusing to the team. And once we got this clarity, and then we got the team involved in the process so they understood, I think their recent thing was, they weren't quite at 7 figures. Now they're like, $1.5 million run rate. They've 5x their average MRR with their clients, done some amazing things by just getting clear, having a true north, and running a consistent process.
Fantastic. Anything else we can add about exceptional execution, or maybe start building the bridge to capability number 3 for our next conversation? Where does it go from here after the exceptional execution?
Well, I think the first 2 really are what I would call like your real world small business MBA, right? Your ability to establish a true north for a business, and your ability to consistently plan for growth and execute that plan for growth. Like those 2 things there that we just talked about, that really is, if you can adopt those things, then you can, I don't want to say be mediocre at the rest, but that really will help take you to the next level, because the next level isn't about, it's not about ideas. As funny as that sounds, it's not about like, what's the next idea that's going to drive a bunch of leads for us? What's the next idea that's going to X, Y, and Z? It's really about how you go about executing ideas. Because when you solely rely on it's the right idea that's responsible, then you get on a hamster wheel of ideas. But when you realize it's not the right idea, it's the right execution of a decent idea that creates growth. So then you start to improve your execution of a given idea. And that means a given idea oftentimes needs to be worked and iterated for a way longer than most people are giving it. Most people are like trying an idea, it didn't work, they move to the next one. Try an idea, work, move to the next one. Really what we want to do is we want to take an idea, agree, get aligned, get clear, and then just work and iterate the heck out of that thing over a long period of time, and to where, you know, one day you're like, oh, that was an amazing idea. It's like, well, it was a good idea. What's amazing is our consistent execution against the idea. That's what's amazing. So that really is, between the true north and exceptional execution, those really are like your real world small business MBA. You know, that's kind of how I look at it.
Awesome. Frank, we're getting on close on time now. Don't want to keep you for much longer. Anything else we want to add about this topic? I think we've covered it really well. But anything else you want to mention before I let you go?
No, I really said my point, which is, you know, the yin and yang of business growth is strategy and execution. And again, I think a lot of small business owners hear execution and they immediately think of how they're executing work for clients. And certainly that's a piece of it, but it really is not the kind of execution I'm talking about. The kind of execution I'm talking about is, what is the process for getting a management and leadership team aligned in planning for growth and executing towards growth, right? And so the growth momentum method is a whole process that's why we do a momentum analysis first, because before we develop the plan, we have to know where we're going to focus our plan for the quarter. And it starts there.
Frank, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, man. And thanks again for the wonderful insights, for this collaboration that we have going on. And let's keep it going, because it's a treat. So I know agency leaders will find this super, super helpful. And if there's anything we need to talk about, we know where to reach each other.
Awesome. Thanks, Francois. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.